I work in the pro department of a home improvement company. I worked the closing shift with another cashier, who I'll call Aria. Aria's a really kind but quite timid cashier. She's also very pretty, so she has a lot of contractors hit on her. It's usually not that worrisome, though a few compliments, maybe a dinner invite, which she'd politely decline. I would probably ask her out as well if it wasn't for one detail: Aria does have a girlfriend. So being hit on by guys on a daily basis makes her rather uncomfortable. When we first met, I told her she ought to tell those guys about being gay, but she kept saying it wasn't any of their business, so she kept that part to herself. Aria has become my best friend, and having another cashier there with you keeps things from getting lonely. We even cover for each other's lunch breaks. One day, when I came back from lunch, Aria started telling me about this rather creepy guy who was flirting with her. She said she politely turned him down, saying she was with someone already, and while he didn't seem happy, he did leave. I shrugged it off as nothing more than the usual horny guy and laughed it off. But later that day, the man came back. Aria wasn't there, as she had left to help a customer find some lumber, so it was just me. He looked rather normal, probably handsome to most women, but he acted off. After looking around the area, I asked him if I could help him with anything. "I'm here to see Aria," he told me. I asked him how he knew her, and he said he had come in earlier and asked her out, to which she said yes, so he had come back in to pick her up. I told him she had left for the day, a usual lie everyone tells to cover for their friends. His smile went away as he started looking annoyed. He said he wanted to speak to Aria and ask her out again, which contradicted what he had just told me about accepting his previous invite. I told him he could not do that, which caused him to cross his arms and asked me why not. I'm not the best liar when it comes to making up excuses on the spot. However, I didn't want to tell him Aria was gay if she didn't want him to know it. So I just blurted out that Aria was my fiancée. His annoyed look went to confusion as he asked me how someone as pretty as she is could go out with someone like me. I'm not a Chris Evans or anything, but I don't think I'm that bad looking. I told him it didn't matter and that she and I were getting married in a couple of months, so he needed to back off. He gave me a death look but didn't say anything. After an awkward silence, he left. After Aria had gotten back, I told her what went down. She asked me to describe him, and after I told her what he looked like, she said that was the same guy who came in before. She was a bit creeped out by what went down but found the fiancé excuse rather funny. She even stated she'd rather be engaged to me than go out with him, which I'm guessing was a compliment. A couple of weeks went by, and we had all but forgotten about the man. At this point, one night after it had gotten dark, Aria and I were getting the trash together so we could close down the registers and go home. Just then, we heard a bang at the door, causing both of us to nearly jump out of our skins. It was the guy again. He had a wild look in his eyes as he kept his face pressed against the glass. "We're closed," I told him, but he insisted he needed to come in. Aria yelled again to tell him she's not interested and for him to go away and leave her alone. But he yelled that he's not here for her, he's here for me. He then says that if he can take out her husband, then she'd be all his. Based on that, he wanted to kill me. I told Aria to run to the manager's office and call the police, and I'd stay here and watch him. I won't lie though, I was pretty afraid to be in that tiny little area. If the guy was able to get in, he wasn't the biggest guy, but he could have had a weapon on him. Plus, the store doesn't allow us to have self-defense items on us, so I was on my own here. The guy then started ramming the sliding doors like he was crazy. The doors were rattling. I could have sworn they were going to come off their base. Just then, Arya came running back around the corner with a 2x4 in her hand, yelling that the cops were on their way. Finally, the man decided to leave. The closing manager met the officers when they came, and he took them to review the cameras. Thankfully, the man was caught and arrested, but Arya and I felt unsafe working there any longer. We're still friends and even attend the same college together, but we have separate jobs now while we pay our way through classes. I'm glad she was there to help me with the rogue man, as I hate to imagine what he might have done to me, or worse, what he might have done to her. She says she's glad I was there for her as well, as having a guy around tends to make men like him less confident in what they might try. It was a wake-up call for me as to how dangerous it can be for some girls when an interested guy just doesn't want to take no for an answer. I used to work as a night clerk in a downtown condominium. The association had a lot of security concerns due to the way the building was constructed back in the late 60s. Both levels of the parking garage were accessible from street level, so there were a lot of possible entry points, many of which were located in blind spots of the security camera system. For that reason, I was required to make 2 rounds around the entire building during my shift to make sure no non-residents had found their way in. The most serious issue we had was the occasional carjacking, but what I encountered most often was homeless people who had found their way into the garage and were huddling in some corner for a bit of shelter. Kicking them back out into the street was by far my least favorite part of the job, but I had to do it. After working there for several months, I knew all the spots that people liked to hide in. The building was very old and had undergone many renovations in its lifetime, which created a lot of nooks and crannies, unnecessary concrete protrusions, sealed-off rooms, and hallways and stairs that led to nowhere. The creepiest spot in the whole building was so weird and potentially dangerous that I took a picture of it and brought it up to management. On the first floor of the garage, there was a door that opened up to a corridor directly underneath the ramp up to the second level of the garage. It was about 3 feet wide and ran about 20 to 30 feet, but it led to literally nowhere. At the end of it was a large water pipe with a valve, which was the only reason the space existed. But in the dark, with just a weak flashlight, that pipe seemed to take on many other forms. What made it dangerous, however, was the lock on the door. There was no padlock or keyhole on either side, but on the outside was a large sliding bolt latch. There was only one way in or out, and it locked from the outside with no way to unlock it from the inside. Ever since I discovered the spot, I couldn't help but imagine how easy it would be for someone to get trapped in there. However, nothing I said to management made any difference. They were already aware of it and had no intention of doing anything about it. Unfortunately, that meant I would have to open the door and check on it every night, but I never stepped foot inside of it. I was way too scared of it. Things went on like that for months, and then one day my worst fear was realized. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning, halfway through my shift. I was doing my rounds in the parking garage, and everything was normal. It was a slow Wednesday night. There hadn't been any problems or suspicious activity on the cameras, so I was far from on edge at the time. But then, in one moment, I was forced to go on alert. I heard the sound of a door slamming across the garage. I wasn't exactly sure where it was, so I walked over to investigate. My heart sank a bit when I saw that the door to the dead-end hallway was wide open. I looked around to see if anyone was in the garage, but I appeared to be alone. I shouted to intimidate anyone if they were hiding somewhere I couldn't see, but I got no response and nobody appeared. I was just worried that there was somebody hiding in the dead-end hallway, so I walked the rest of the way. I shined my flashlight down the hallway, and for a moment, I was relieved to see that nobody was in there. There was, however, an empty glass bottle about 10 feet inside. I sighed and rolled my eyes, thinking that somebody had been drinking in there and had run out in a hurry once they saw me snooping around, accidentally making noise as they rushed. It wouldn't have been that hard for somebody to climb up on the cars parked there to get above the wall and hop the fence into the neighboring parking lot. By the time I got there, since the garage was partially underground in that spot, in fact, that's how a lot of people get in because the dead-end hallway happened to be in a prominent blind spot of the cameras. Unfortunately, I wasn't allowed to leave trash anywhere if I saw it, so I knew I had to pick up that bottle. Of course, I felt the anxiety bubbling up inside my gut just for knowing I had to walk a few steps inside that hallway. I almost didn't do it, but I rationalized myself into thinking there was no way somebody would pop out and lock me in. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, but right as I reached the bottle, the door slammed shut. I immediately ran back to the door, but by the time I got there, it was already locked. I started banging on the door and screaming for help, but there was nobody there. I felt like I was being buried alive, like I could barely breathe. If it weren't for my flashlight, I would have been in some deep trouble. I wouldn't have been able to see a thing. Once I realized I wasn't getting out anytime soon, I reached for my phone. To my utter heartbreak, however, there was no service at all. The walls were made of cinder blocks, the door was made of metal, and the entire 6-story building was on top of me. No matter what I tried, I couldn't call 911. There was absolutely nothing I could do. I was completely stuck. The only way I was getting out was if somebody opened the door from the outside. But it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and it would be hours before anybody left for work. During that time, whoever trapped me was doing whatever they pleased in the parking garage. I heard several car alarms go off, and I knew what was happening. Somehow, they all turned off after a few minutes. I kept banging on the door and shouting, but nobody came. After a while, if I'm being completely honest, I gave up hope that I would be free anytime soon and just focused on staying calm. I sat down against the wall and turned off my flashlight to save the battery, but only after making sure I was completely alone. Every few minutes, I banged on the door a bunch of times. It took me about 2 hours, but finally, I managed to get the attention of somebody going to work early in the morning. I thanked them as they let me out, but unfortunately, the next thing I had to do was call the cops because I quickly noticed that a dozen cars had been broken into. There was broken glass all over the parking lot from all the windows that had been shattered. Whoever it was knew exactly what they were doing. They knew how to trap me in there and how to silence the alarms of the cars they were breaking into. We only had security guards on the weekends, and it left us vulnerable on a seemingly benign Wednesday. All in all, there were tens of thousands of dollars in damages and theft, and I was fired from my job. Not that I would want to go back anyway. The culprit was never identified on the cameras and was never caught. Up until about a year ago, I worked at a grocery chain. I was, and still am, a working college student. My availability was only 6 p.m. to closing, which in this case was midnight. It wasn't my favorite job. I dealt with a lot of annoying customers and coworkers, one of whom once broke into my locker and put a used tampon in the pocket of my apron, but that's a whole different story. My job was walking distance from where I lived, which made it really convenient since I didn't have a car. One Friday night, I was closing as usual with my supervisor, and we were running later than we usually did. My supervisor and I finally got the remaining customers out of the store, clocked out, and left. I left before my supervisor and began walking home. After a long, frustrating day of annoying customers, it felt great to just walk through the fresh winter air. I spent a few minutes shuffling through my phone's playlist to find a song to walk home to. I had made my way down the main road, careful not to slip on any of the ice. One thing that's really important to know about me is that I'm a very anxious person, and while it's definitely a problem most of the time, it does help make me constantly aware of my surroundings. That's when I saw an approaching car slowing down on the deserted main road, and I automatically went on high alert. It was a black car that came to a slow stop against the sidewalk I was on, about 10 feet behind me. I immediately clutched my phone in my hand and brought it out of my pocket. If there wasn't any ice covering the sidewalk and my feet didn't hurt, I probably would have run. Instead, I opted to try and pretend that I wasn't afraid, which I don't think worked because I picked up my pace after the car stopped. It was then that I heard a man's voice call out to me. "Hey, it's cold out here. You want a ride?" the man said. I kept walking away from him up the street, pretending I didn't hear him and just hoping he would go away. It didn't work. A few moments later, I heard the car tires crushing the ice on the road and then turned around to see what he was doing. He was now driving with the car in reverse. When he caught up to me, he had rolled down the passenger seat window some more. He was a black man, maybe in his mid to late 30s. He looked at me and I stopped, prompting him to stop his car as well. "Hey, let me give you a ride," he said through the car window. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to be polite because even though I was scared, I tried to be rational. All he did was offer a girl a ride home who was walking in the cold at night. Also, with the possibility of him being a kidnapper or a rapist, it was really best not to piss him off on the empty street. "No thank you," I said politely but firmly that I hesitated for a second. I was trying to figure out what to say that would get him to leave me alone away which street I lived on. "I'm okay," I insisted. "Thanks, though." As I finished thanking him, I started walking again, now putting both headphones in with the song paused. It was more of a way to signal that I was done talking to him. He didn't say anything, but I knew that he was watching me walk away. I felt relieved when I got a few more feet away from his car and heard the sound of his tires driving away. Unfortunately, the situation was only getting worse. As I started walking past the entrance of a car dealership, I saw the same car making a U-turn in the middle of the street out of the corner of my eye. When I turned slightly, he pulled up to the sidewalk yet again, this time a few feet in front of me. The man then opened the driver's seat door and got out of the car. It was at that point I was actually afraid I wouldn't make it home that night. He looked at me with this weird expression on his face. He had this really focused look while trying to look casual. It's really hard to describe. He started walking up to me. This kind of situation had never happened to me before, but I always thought of dangerous hypothetical situations in my head. I guess thinking about those situations prepared me to an extent because before I even realized it, my phone was already against my ear like I was on the phone with someone, even though I wasn't. When he came closer to me, he saw my phone in my hand and must have realized someone could know where I am right now, or I could be calling 911. That's the only explanation I can think of because when he looked at my phone, his demeanor totally changed. He stopped in his tracks with a worried look on his face and then asked me, "Oh, are you on the phone with someone right now?" I replied, looking at him with my phone still against my face and my other hand casually in my pocket. Without saying anything else, the man immediately turned around, got back in his car, and then started to drive up the street. I walked slowly at first, letting some distance grow between us, but as soon as I felt safer, I walked up the street as fast as I could without slipping. I frantically tried to call my dad, who I thought was home at the time. He didn't pick up. I then tried to call my sister and my fiancé. I didn't feel like I was in danger anymore, but my adrenaline was through the roof and I wanted to hear from someone who would make me feel better. I gave up calling after I couldn't get in touch with anyone and just kept walking. I was finally getting ready to turn onto another street when I passed an empty parking lot and saw the same man leaning against his car looking over at me. "Hey," was all he said in a flat tone when I walked by. At this point, I was completely freaked out. I didn't have my phone out anymore, so I couldn't pretend I was talking to someone again, and I was also significantly closer to my house. If he decided to get into his car and follow me, there wasn't any detour I could take to try and lose him. I was now on the verge of tears, and that's when I decided to call 911. I called 911 and told them the situation. The officer on the other line stayed on the phone with me until I got into my house. After that, an officer came to my house and asked me a bunch of questions about the man. He also asked me about his car and where I last saw him. All of the details were either too vague or I didn't remember. He said that he would at least patrol the area for him. I'm not really sure if he actually did or not, but it made me feel better at the time. From that point, I needed a ride to and from work every shift until I got my schedule changed to day shifts. Just a few weeks later, the college semester ended and I was planning on skipping a semester anyway. That experience only reinforced my decision. The more I think about that situation, the more I realize how lucky I was. I was in the perfect position to be taken, but I actually used some quick thinking that really de-escalated the situation. I moved in with my fiancé, and now I have a pocket knife and pepper spray for whenever I walk home at night from my new job. It's something to remember. If you haven't called 911, if you don't have anything to defend yourself against someone, either let someone know where you are or pretend that they know where you are. It can potentially save your life. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch the latest videos.